Hello, and it's McFealty here again in our short series, The Platform and the Circle. So I'm talking to my old friend, colleague and mentor, Rg Gregory, and tonight we're going to talk about theatre. And in a sense tonight, really, I'm going to just start off by filling in a little bit of Greg's biographical detail on how, in the first place, he got involved in the whole business of theatre. And it's very much a brief history of the movement from the platform, i.e. the proscenium march, the kind of traditional theatre, into the circle, the theatre in the round form that Greg spent most of his life working in. The story begins back in, what would it be, the 30s or 40s, and at 17, Greg's has this sort of epiphanous moment, if you like, that somehow that his future is going to lie as a playwright, someone who's intimately engaged with the theatre. And from then on, he gets involved first locally in Southampton and then at King's College in London, but serially dissatisfied with the theatre in some way, the sense that the Shakespeare production, on one occasion he goes to see just north of Trafalgar Square, is not really speaking to him in his world, and a growing sense that traditional theatre isn't really putting the word, at the center, language, if you like, at the center. That it has all these accretions of the mechanicals of theatre, the curtains, the costumes, the lights, the makeup, all of that kind of clagging down, to use an Irish term, on the core, the core of the performance. Time kind of moves on. Let me see if I can figure out my own sort of progression here. Time sort of moves on, and after King's College, he comes back to Southampton. Several experiments. Several of them very high profile, but don't work. And there's a sense that Greg spends 2 or 3 years trying to work through the proscenium march, because the theatre company that he set up has insisted, after a few experiments with open theatre, that they go back into proscenium march. And 4 years are spent then just pulling away one by one all those kind of accretions, to the point where and this doesn't seem shocking anymore, even in conventional theatre, but they're doing away with the curtain, doing away with the costumes, all the rest of it, to the sense that and at this point he comes across Stephen Joseph's writing about theatre in the round, and there's a decision about 1959 to make a break with all conventional forms and plump for this theatre in the round form. That is really any space in which the actors and the play, the action of the play, is entirely surrounded on 4 sides by theatre in the round. One thing leads on to another, and it ends up in 1972 with the establishment of a professional theatre company in Dorset, doing a particular kind of spontaneous play creation called instant theatre, which is what, in the end, Word in Action, the company I joined 30 years ago, made its living at, made its reputation at. The absolute involvement of the audience in the creation of the play, first of all through a question and answer process, and then through adopting some of the major and minor parts in that, including, as it happened, inanimate objects and almost everything required by the story of the play. And in that sense, it was about putting the word back as the driver of meaning within the play and everything else that happens. All of that really, in a sense, is a very personal biographical journey from the platform, the raised arch, the sort of the authority point symbolically within theatre, to the sense that the actors and the actions and everything that comes of the play arises out of this kind of central space entirely surrounded by the audience. So Greg tell us a little bit about this. I mean, and why do you think theatre is so important to society, that you've spent most of your now long life intimately engaged with this sort of obsession with, first of all, theatre in itself, but also this kind of shift in form?
Well, at some point, I think probably through Stephen Joseph, or maybe before that, to realise that theatre is like an image, a sort of a mirror image of the structures of real, inverted commas, life. You know, the life that we live, and the way that, and with its platform within it, within its you know, within its gradings, within its classes, that it's like the theatre as a building is a world in itself, which nevertheless cannot help but reflect the world outside it. When the world outside it changes, changes begin to occur within the theatre. Not in a straight line, they occur and then they go back again a little bit, but gradually you begin to realize that the history of theatre shape, for example, is the history of the society that we as human beings have lived in, you know, have been molded by. It's the form of life, the form of our institutions, which creates the possibility of what we can do or not do as people. And that's so within the theatre. It's the shape of the theatre building, and then the stage within it, that actually shapes what actors are able to do with the word that they're given, and how they can relate to the audience. I mean, and most theatre, I mean, Greek theatre started, well, or Egyptian theatre, Greek theatre, they all start with, they started with a sense of the round. They're coming out of what I call the time of the female principle. But gradually, as authority gets involved, it requires its platforms. If you put yourself above people, mainly technically to be heard so that you can be seen, and but nevertheless you put yourself on a platform above people, and that
one of the things when we were talking just before we started, and I put that ad hoc introduction together, one of the things you talked about, and which I mentioned in that introduction, was the displacement of the word as the central driver of the drama, and that you didn't start from an understanding of theatre form, but you started in a sense from a frustration that somehow that word element, that language element, the driver of meaning, if you like, was being suffocated somewhat by all of these kind of affectations of conventional theatre.
Yeah, I mean, the biblical phrase in the beginning was the word. And it's not until we get the word that we are able actually to begin to explain ourselves. Yeah, well, dance, the rituals that Dionysus is supposed to be connected with, that's explaining something very important about people, but it's not actually explaining it in a way that conveys the ordinary world, that conveys the ordinary situation. We have to work this gift of language, imperfect though it is, enables us to speak, to define who we are, and that definition of who we are gets more and more local. So we've now got, well, talking about Babel, but that we've now got many languages, because language gets down to the root of what it is to live in a certain environment.
But Greg, one of the things that I'm trying to get at was that your frustration, the thing that led you into this sense that the theatre as you saw it wasn't working back in the early 1950s or late 40s or whenever it was.
Yeah.
That
Well,
that frustration that kind of draws you towards a piece of granite. You know, the sculptor kind of not really knowing what he's going to uncover, but it's that frustration of the word being, I don't want to use any more pejorative terms, but you know that the sense that the rescuing the word from all this paraphernalia is
yeah.
the thing that drives you towards the later discoveries.
Well, there are two words. One's the authority's word, and the other's the creative word. And word has been used very effectively by you know, we have an authority structure within words, but it's that creative word, that sort of niggle of that within me of how to express myself. I mean, as a kid, I went to and loved pantomimes. That's all I knew about theatre. During the war, when I was living, you know, until I was 17, there was very, very little theatre because it was considered unsafe. And so I didn't pick up to it until I got back to Southampton in the sixth form, and we began to do plays there, and I was quite good. I did a production of a scene from Marlowe's Faustus, and that's where I began to realise that maybe I had a certain talent in that area. But this 17, at 17, that was, I mean, that hit me from nowhere. I was on walking in the common, Southampton Common, down towards the centre of the town, and I had some kind, what I think, it seemed like a visitation. I mean, it came out of nowhere. There was a kind of some kind of lighting up in the head, and in one second, I knew what I was striving to be, what I had to strive to be. And, you know, whatever the cause of that was, it might be a psychiatric deficiency, I don't know. But from then on, I began seriously to think, with no experience of theatre in any real sense, I began to think, well, how does that apply to me? How can I apply that to my life? And so I joined a local theatre group, which was just a corny amateur theatre group. They called themselves the Peregrine Players. I took part in the production of Private Lives as Elliot, or whatever the name of the bloke was. And then I went off but by the time I went off to university then, right? In the army, that's right, I went in the army for 2.5 years, and I saw a lot of production, but mostly of opera, and always on the stage. But I began to be aware that there was something about that setup of theatre that where the audience was swallowed up by the production, that in a sense, as though they were swallowed into the stage, but not as I mean, enjoying it too, you know, and I enjoyed it. I saw quite a lot of interesting productions, but at that time I was working as a sergeant with Rhine Army School of Preliminary Education, and therefore meeting a lot of soldiers there who were considered not properly educated, and I started doing things with them, but always on a stage, but realizing that there was something else niggling at me. And when I went to university, I had decided, yes, I was doing English, but I would involve myself in both literature and drama, because I began to write. I got my first poem accepted in a London magazine when I was just before I went to university, and there was that and also I was influenced by Eliot and Auden and those plays. The idea that you know, there was something about language, about poetic language, that actually took us deeper into this tussle that was going on right at the depth of drama. That, you know, and then I picked it up to do with Greek drama and the things like that. So I kind of worked backwards there. But I began to realise that for me, the interest was in the word, how the word got presented from the actor to the audience. And then to begin to be worried a bit about the divisions between the actor and the audience. And by the time I got to this Shakespeare, but I forget what it was. I think it was one of the comedies that I saw in a London theatre that was highly acclaimed, and I came out of that and felt, bugger, this isn't, somehow this is not for me. This is not the world that I came from, or the world that I wanted to belong to. There was a relationship there that I couldn't trust. And so I went back to Southampton and set up the Rostrum Theatre. I thought the answer lay in platforms, ironically. And did a production there that fell on its nose, in the equivalent to the Central Hall to the Albert Hall in Southampton, called the Central Hall. And it was just, well, I gathered actors from all over the place, people who never acted before, and so on, and that fell on its face, and I had to start again. And I got back into the proscenium, as you said, and I started pulling that apart. But it was the arrival of Ron James, the drama advisor in Hampshire, that kind of backed up for the first time my feeling that there was something else to go for in the dramatic theatrical experience. And he introduced the concept of, he did all his productions in the semi arena, and he brought this idea of participation. That was where I first.
And spontaneity.
Sorry.
And spontaneity. That's where the spontaneity part came from.
And spontaneity, that you didn't have to prepare your thought before you did it. That almost you worked by instant reaction to what somebody had said, and therefore freed up something inside yourself away from the form that standardized theatre was in. So in terms of parallels, I mean, one of the most obvious parallels in film to that approach is Mike Leigh's work with film actors, theatre as well, but that all sort of comes out about the same sort of time, the early 60s, late 50s, early 60s. Yes, I think I'm not sure when his. I mean, I saw Abigail's part. I mean, and I watched a program on him last night, and I thought that those early plays were what his critics said, that a kind of strange human being was created within those that didn't stand for the working class, didn't stand for the middle class. They had strange ways of presenting themselves. But as the program went on, and you saw where he went with what he's doing, it became more meaningful to me, you know, and touching upon very, very similar arguments that I was working by. And
there's something about authenticity. I mean, there's a particular, that's the Arena program that was on last night on BBC, but there's a certain point there in one of the productions where he sets up a particular scene where one of the actors has a particular backstory, but the others are not told about the backstory. They simply come in and they film this particular scene, and then the narrative of her backstory is announced, and the others are, well, as some of them said, they didn't have to prepare for it. There was no acting involved. It was just them. So what Leigh was working for in those situations was authenticity in the performance.
Yeah, but also
that's the thing, in a sense. That's a break point for you, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, what
search for authenticity
program is how much control he had of what he was doing. He says people think we just went and did those things. No, I went and I gathered notes and I went home and I wrote. He was actually the playwright of these things. Yeah, it was, but it was a sense that we were locked in a way of being that was not true to people. I mean, it's coming back. I thought that, after if you lived through the wars I did as a kid, right? That war ended with an enormous amount of enthusiasm for the fact that something different was now going to happen. It began to happen, and then we lost it. The strange thing with me is I think we lost it in the 60s, but that's a very peculiar attitude for people.
Well, let's not. I mean, I want to stick with this thing about authenticity.
Yeah.
And this thing about and you've obviously got some concerns that the staginess of the 1930s and 40s is something that's coming back. But then, as you've also said in previous conversations we've had, these things in art often work in cycles. But that movement towards spontaneity is a kind of a movement, in a sense. It's part of this journey from the platform, from the removed space to the space contained by the audience.
Well, I mean, what
spontaneity becomes a prerequisite for what happens later on in your career.
Yeah, that's right. But what astonishes me is quite a lot of improvisation is still done off a stage, and that it's the stage looked as though it was going out in the early part of the 20th century. I mean, there were experiments on what Brecht was doing, what people like that were doing, and was it Reiner, the bloke who had a kind of round at work in that early period, and in schools drama, amateur drama, there were people working long before Stephen Joseph. Stephen Joseph got his idea of the round from watching an amateur bloke whose name I know, but I can't immediately remember it. But that sense that things were moving, things were changing. What stopped it was the atomic bomb. The consequences of the atomic bomb and the atomic bomb moving on to the nuclear bomb in the 60s. I mean, that created an enormous terror, which in a way forced people back into what they thought was safe. That was a statement of the world, really, that was contained within the forms that had already established themselves.
So what you're suggesting is that in terms of a social response to that threat, the people who were moving out of old forms looking for new,
I thought there was locked up
back into that.
Yeah. Well, I thought there was locked up in education in the 50s the way of doing things. And it was called the free art, free drama movement. It got poo-pooed, it got ridiculed, and it sort of really got dismissed. And with that was growing the idea that education as it was not working, and that's even more so now. I think education has become ludicrous. I mean, with this emphasis upon exams and uniforms and all those things that have been brought back when they were on the way out. What it basically says is adults cannot trust children to find their own way forward, or to break into territory that they can then carry forward as adults.
Okay, now we're going to come back to education, so I don't want to spend too much time on that here. Let's move on a little bit further in your search for another theatre form. So spontaneity is something that sort of comes with not just the discovery of the round, but the determination to work from 1959 onwards in the round only.
Yes, I mean, I saw that was absolutely clear to a world that I could belong to, an idea.
What was clear at that point to you?
I was going to say earlier on that in a way that when theatre was near to the point of collapse, right, the Roman theatre was near to point, and it was only kept alive by people wandering all over Europe doing things. I don't know about the Far East, but the thing that came back first of all were the rounds, the Cornish rounds. The round is the theatre where there is no authority. The round provides for theatre where there's an equality of purpose and an equality of value. And when I was working in, when I shifted, that's what I saw from what Joseph was doing, and in conversations with Joseph, was taken deeper into the symbolism of the round and, what it was trying to say. In that book that came out about him recently, he was even sort of thinking that his audience should eat fish and chips sitting around watching, that the actors from the middle had to engage their audience in some way and break through what the audience would normally be doing.
And vie for their attention on almost a one-to-one basis.
Yeah, and I didn't really take to that because I saw the playwright. I mean, it's this business of the individual and the collective. Theatre is a kind of collective activity in a way. The playwright is the authentic individual voice that has to be there. Things on the whole aren't created by bunches of people together. It's that somewhere there has to be that single voice putting something in. And I began to dislike the idea of the playwright simply being someone who sat around and listened to actors and scripted what they said, because you lost that inner deep provocation of an idea that only the single playwright could give. Although working, with the actors, I believe that the playwright provides the play, and he says the actors get on with it. That's your job. That's your job. You get on with what I've provided you with, right? And make it yours and interpret it as you wish. Because if my words are any good, you will be able to get a satisfactory interpretation out of it.
So all of this carries on from 59, various periods working in education, and first of all in England, then briefly in Africa, and then in England again, until finally the education system, well, by mutual consent, you and the English education system part company in about 1970.
Well, I came back from Uganda determined I wasn't going to be pushed around anymore. In Uganda, I had set up a system which has still not been repeated, the block, where, I mean, we talk about we shouldn't have 30 kids to teach. The thing about the private schools, they can teach 6, 7 at a time. I took 200 people to English at the same time. And they themselves, the students in groups of 6 sitting in this vast room, made all their decisions. The teacher didn't teach. And that's the secret.
So you brought some of these kind of dangerous colonial ideas back to Mother England, and determined you weren't going to get pushed around, but you did get pushed around, and it finally got pushed out of education, and that's when you dedicated the rest of your life to working in theatre.
Yeah, well, I wanted to work in theatre. I didn't want to come back into a school, but the offer of the job in the Grove Market Drayton was so attractive. And when I went up there, I mean, the headmaster so forward-looking in what he was doing that I willingly moved from being head of English to head of drama. And through drama began to explore improvisation much, much more than I was able to before, but with much more knowledge of what I was after. I'd been asked, I'd actually got the job at the school because I'd worked on the English block. I'd invented the English block. But the teachers, particularly the bloke in charge, simply couldn't take it.
Sure.
So I was outside it, so I concentrated on drama and actually did both instant theatre and argument drama. Argument drama is a form of theatre with the actors, as you know, the actors seem to be doing something, and it breaks out into an argument, a personal argument, which the audience then feels compelled to join in. And out of that comes the idea of a play, and then I followed argument drama with piece of instant theatre, so everybody got happy again. But I did one thing in
one was to provoke tragedy and dissent and divergence in the audience, and the other one was,
well, the headmaster at the Grove let me go in and to take an assembly where I provoked an argument with a 4th-year boy right, which almost led to a fight. I mean, he knew what he was doing, and I knew what I was doing. But when it became clear that it was set up, the whole audience stood up and cheered.
Yeah.
But half the staff, or some of the staff, were on the bloody platform ready to join in, and some of them walked out. All sorts of things happened, right? And then I did another thing at Dorothy Heathcote's, which ended with somebody being pushed in a bloody pond. That was me. I got pushed in the pond. And then she was doing a talk, and we did a big together, which broke that up. So it's like it was, by that time, I was...
All of this, Greg, all of this is playing around, if you like, in one way or another. It's playing around with this interface between the professional actor, who traditionally, or at least in latter day tradition, is there as the primary actor, the person who is there to do unto the audience the play, or to do unto the audience the entertainment. And all of this is about you playing, not so much just, I mean, because the argument drama thing, in a sense, we see that through psychodrama. We see similar kind of provocations in, I mean, even Mike Lee's stuff. Certainly the early stuff is all about exploring conflict. But it's that interplay with the audience that I think sets your work on a different plane from some of these other contemporary experiments at the time.
Yes, I didn't know. I hadn't met any... And I saw quite a lot of participatory theatre later on from where we are in this discussion, and it was always actor controlled, always director controlled. They couldn't let it get outside a certain limit. Whereas I was putting, I mean, when I came up here to live recently, the bloke who took the main part in that school thing that nearly ended in a fight, he said it changed his life. Well, whether it did or not, but he still remembered it very strongly 40 years on. And the idea was actually telling the people that they could have a say, they could have an influence, that they didn't have to be stuck to what the director had told actors to do, but the directors and the actors working on in the proscenium are tied by what the management will allow them to do. They can't go against, well, they wouldn't be allowed to do the play. We've had that fairly recently, but it's that the audience, there was a relationship between the actor and the audience that did not need this raised lit space, did not need to be in a different light, did not need to actually be the voices of the people. The thing on television tonight, where actors are out in the Midlands doing a play that the police have set up in order to get people, youngsters, to understand what's wrong with jihadism and stuff like that. And that's exactly really, but if you work within that system and you work off a stage, whether you think you're breaking that system or not, or whether you're saying something outrageous, the fact is you are doing it within that structure, and that structure has its hold on you, whatever you do, even to the point of sacking you if you do it wrongly.
But I mean, that's an interesting example, because I was going to try and bring it up towards the the whole way, in a sense, that the internet is demanding that communication changes. There's a line you use, which I can't now remember it clearly enough because we've moved on a little bit, but there's a line there that you said that that the audience and the actors no longer need these things around the stage, the proscenium arch, the costumes, the lights, the pre-done script, the blocking managed by a director who has to watch from the back of the hall to see just what kind of pictures created by each kind of moment-by-moment scene. Now, the actors in the round no longer need that, but also they're freed by the fact that they no longer have these strings that tie up the kind of uber marionette of the conventional actor, and that creates the possibility of a different relationship with the audience around them.
Yeah.
And it seems to me that that's what you're probing at this particular early point. And in the case in point of instant theatre, in which, if people will recall, I mentioned at the beginning, a story is created by the audience. That's a moving over into the other side and saying that actually the authority, the authors of this particular play are going to be you, the audience. And that shifts quite profoundly what that set of actors' relationship is with the audience. It confers on them a duty and a responsibility not to preach, but to listen and to help that group of people produce what it is they want to say at that particular moment in time. And
Yeah.
it seems to me that that is it's a very profound shift. It's being reflected, I think, in some of the more modern changes that we're seeing, not in theatre, but in this whole business of this open commons of social media and various other places.
But there's a very important shift also there, and that is the shift from opinion to dream.
Right. I've not heard you talk about that before.
Yeah, I state an opinion, somebody disagrees with it, we fight about it. In dream, you can have your opinion, I can have mine, or you can have your experience, you can have your image, I can have mine, and they can blend. They're both true. So it's a positive statement, and it puts power in the hands of people who've not been used, or representatives of the people who've not been used to having any power at all.
Mm.
And it is a shift in power. What it hasn't done yet, although it's actually discussion about this is coming alive in lots of ways, we haven't yet arrived at a society where actually the people do have that kind of power. Even the voting system, the voting system has come, I hand over to you my responsibility. And if you make voting compulsory, you're saying to people, right, there are two things you can do, right? You make it compulsory, you will give your vote to this structure that's set up there. If you don't like the structure, you can spoil your paper, but the spoiling the paper is really a very negative thing. The fact is, and that still protects that system, because not enough people are going to go and spoil the paper to make the voting. But we have to look at what democracy is about. What it's supposed to...
Greg, we have a very rich set of experiences here, and democracy is one of the later ones that we want to get into, and I don't want to put too many spoilers on that.
No, but in a way it is tied up. The theatre expresses that all. That it has that potential. It brings up, if you look at theatre properly, not simply as an entertainment, but as a symbolic statement of who we are as people, what our relationship is with the world, then all those things, get sucked into it, all those issues. It's not just the theatre there and the way that we live our lives there.
I had initially planned that we'd keep this on a very tight time budget, but I think it's quite useful to just let this run a little bit further. What I'm going to say, though, is if there is anybody out there watching this live at this particular moment in time, I've set up a Q&A app. So if there's any questions that you want to throw in to Greg and I, just use that app, stick 1, 2, 3 questions up there, and when we get towards the end, we'll kind of take time out, and we'll try and answer some of those questions. So, that's interesting what you're saying. I think about the politics and how it kind of melds into the politics. And as I said, we're going to come to that a little bit later on in the series. But in a sense, when it gets to 1972 and you kind of strike out away from education, away from all the strictures of that, and you have this idea of instant theatre, can you just tell us a little bit about what that journey means from that particular point onwards? What did you discover about theatre from just doing literally hundreds and then thousands of these performances of these instant theatres?
Yeah, when I was at the Grove, first of all, and I did it with teachers and members of the community, and we went round to schools and other places, I only had a vague idea of what we were reaching towards. there were 6 actors. I'd take 6 actors with me. Any one of those actors could ask the questions. We still tried to work to the business of keeping everything that was said as true, but actually it was very, very difficult to blend it, because the nature of the question from one actor would be very, very different from the nature of the question of another actor, and you'd get a potpourri of information in the middle, as it were, that was very, very hard to keep to. When I came to Word and Action, set up Word and Action, which had no money, I gave up as a teacher and I went down there broke, right? And thinking that I could get a living that way. Well, I had that, what I got from the sale of a house to do it. But I realized it had to be streamlined, right? And we had that 3 actors could do it, and those 3 actors had to play a certain role, right? And one role was the questioner. One person had to be the questioner, because that gave a kind of integrity to it all the way through. And then one of the actors became the main actor. So I think this image that I've used before of the collapsed tent, right? You gathered the information, there it was collapsed on the ground. The first actor goes in and holds the pole up, right? And you begin to get the shape. The second actor had a very, very different role, to work with the main actor, but also when all the other parts, because there are many more parts and things to do than than 2 actors and a half, because the questioner would take part, could deal with, right? The job of that actor was to go around and work with the groups of people all the way around. It was like they were all concerned with the tent pegs, pulling out the tent pegs all the way around to complete the structure of the bell tent, and that sort of, those 3 roles gave the structure to the story that was being gathered. But the actors had to be listening all the time to what was told, because they had to translate that story into action, right, with the help of other people. Usually the main actor was acting on his own, or going around meeting these other things. The second actor was in amongst those other people working with it, right? The story had to be kept to. Nothing could be invented that was not possible from the story that had been invented. And although they could throw in remarks, I mean, part of the interest of instant theatre was the way that the questioner could argue with the actors, could pull an actor up for saying, no, that wasn't said, right? So you get a dialogue going there, you get dialogues between the 2 actors, right? And then you've got those who'd come out and volunteered to take the performance roles, even if they were inanimate objects, right? You could find yourself playing a spoon or a fork as much as you'd find yourself playing a cook or somebody else. And then all the way around that, the rest of the audience, who by that time were happy to join in to provide the wind, to provide all the effects that you would need a wind machine for and anything that you had on the stage in a play could be produced by the collective or individual contributions of you. So by the end,
just to make a very minor point there, Greg, one of those sitting at home sort of just scratching their heads and trying to figure out, well, how can these people do all this thing? One of the things I think that changes profoundly when you put people sitting in the round is that the play, it's like we were saying earlier on, you don't need the scenery, you don't need the costumes, in a sense, because it's in the middle. It creates a much more abstract metaphysical space, so that the physical accoutrements, those artifacts that are common within theatre to create a certain impression that you're, say, in the 1890s, or you're in, you're a soldier in the First World War, and all the lighting effects. Because everything, and this goes back to your first obsession, everything begins with the word. That the language, the image, the color, everything is carried in the word, in the action. Sorry, well, it's carried in the first place in the word, and then followed through by the action. But the word really does have, in this pared down, poor theatre, if you like, the word has primacy, and meaning arises from these stories and these narratives in a way that carries through all kinds of implausibilities and unreal, strange situations.
Yeah, it's the word that puts you in touch with with mythology, you know, isn't it? It's the word, the present word being used in the now of a performance of instant theatre, far more than the audience or the actors at that time knowing it, reaches way back into the mythological story of of human existence, and the things that were there earlier, right, and into other folk tales. Because we did a program called Folk Tales, but we did start with standard traditional folktale people. I mean, in the end we probably had 20, 30 different programs which required different starts. But when they got to the point of having established their basic information, done by questioning, neutral questioning, then from there the story went on. And that was that building.
And there's another aspect to this, and I think this comes back to reinforce this idea that it's carried by language and word and narrative. It is that there's a certain strange, not Brechtian alienation, but there's an alienation thing that goes on when things, when people come out to play objects that don't look anything like the objects they're supposed to be. So there is a natural alienation that goes on when five members of the audience come out to play a bed, for instance, and you have them all lined up, kind of bent over like this, and then you, 4 times the size of them, then get into the bed kind of safely without hurting anybody, but there's the bed giggles and all kinds of things happen that in a conventional performance would break that performance, but the alienation, in a sense, is part of the whole business of we are real people in this real space, surrounded by all these real people, telling a very unreal mythical story.
Yeah.
And there's something unbreakable. Let me just finish that. There's something unbreakable about the attention that people give to that. It's less fragile than a moment of pathos in a proscenium arch performance, for instance, where people are kind of almost removed from their bodies into a sublime moment, which is not within themselves, but is in the spectacle of the things presented to them. In this more intimate, rough, medievally crafted experience, with kind of rough edges and things not half done, and the stage manager, if you like, forgetting to put vital pieces in and been told by the audience, you've forgotten this, get that in. There's a kind of a rough collaboration that goes on in there that's really quite different from a lot of the things that you see in conventional theatre, and that, for me, is not just about the spontaneity, but it is about this work on that interface between the actors, the professionals who come in, and the amateurs who do it in that purest sense of the word amateur, for the love of the doing of the thing.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's true. I mean, I feel that in the way that the playwright is the voice of the individual, which is very important, instant theatre is the voice of the collective. And a collective making up a story that they are never in charge of, right? The meaning of it, the deeper meanings of it, they're not even playing with. They're playing with it for fun, for playing with language. I mean, and as you know, as we know, the most incredible answers get given that floor the questioner. I mean, by floor, I mean, are so astonishing. You simply don't expect an answer like that, and the story has to adjust to taking that in. But this collective, this relationship between the individual contribution of the playwright in one sort of theatre, and this contribution of the collective going deeper than they know, right, taken out of their own normal lives into saying things and creating things, something that is so deep that nobody knows how far that goes, but with jokes, people laughing all the time.
There's something here that you mentioned earlier on about the stultification of theatre, and relating that, first of all, to the atomic bomb, then the kind of venture into the nuclear bomb, and then the Cold War, and this whole the Cuban crisis, and all of that sort of stuff. None of this creativity happens without the kind of blanket security that a theatre on the round gives to an audience. That they're cocooning that theatrical space, that creative space, by themselves. And in instant theatre, it's always done with the lights on, often during the daytime, often amongst groups of people that know each other better than the actors know them collectively or individually. And there's something about the sense of security that allows people to kind of create in that space, kind of openly and securely, and to break bounds and to go playfully deeper than they know they're going.
Yeah. And you can do it with 2-year-olds, as I've done it with, right, and so have other people. That the 2-year-olds contribute, and very, very old people like me now, they contribute. It doesn't. You can do it in homes of people who can hardly speak. You do it in homes, in places where people are. I don't know what the term for it is now, but I find it very, very difficult to communicate at all. And that same human wisdom is there in all of them. It's not learned. I mean, if you take a 2-year-old and you take a 98-year-old person, right, or whatever, then in terms of the length of time that humanity's been on the go, there's no difference. And they all somehow have access to a sense of language that contains within it, that where every word contains the possibility of a metaphor or a simile or something else about it. And everything that goes into this pudding of words, it works. That is, if the questioner does the job properly. The moment the questioner starts manipulating it, the moment the questioner quite clearly does not take an answer that he's heard, because you get so many answers called out, you can't take the lot. You have to take what you hear at that moment and use it. And you can tell when questioners are not doing that. It's the questioner who can bugger it up, because the questioning is not done with the sincerity and the understanding that the questioner has to have.
And I think that's important to understand this particular process, that the process is well explained at the very beginning, that the audience know that the bargain is that their end of it is that they get final say over what goes in, but it's the questioner's job to stand over the logic of the story, so that if an element comes in that conflicts with a previously found element, that it's their job simply to throw that dilemma back to the audience, and the audience being the authorities, the authors, if you like, the collective authors, it's their responsibility to sort that mess out in some sort of...
Even at that stage, they're not allowed to deny one of those answers.
Right, and it's quite a... One of its successes, I think, was this whole business of setting the rules and enforcing the rules, both internally upon the questioner and externally on the process itself. But much as it's a great pleasure to talk about instant theatre, that it's a phase, in a sense, it's a phase in your own biographical journey, and it's a phase unlike the earlier parts. It's less about exploration and more about exposition of the capacity of the actor and the audience to relate differently to one another in a different space, in ways in which that space almost commands them to do. In other words, to adopt a more egalitarian kind of relationship. And it seems to me that that's the essence. It's almost but not really the final destination of your kind of hunt for putting the word back at the center of the theatrical process.
But also, it's an attempt to find a form that is both firm and enabling. Not a form which is so firm that people can't breathe, but a form itself which is which says within itself symbolically, right, you are free within this form if you accept the form. If you try and break the form, if you try and make yourself into a platform, as we've had, you know, I have an experience in Word and Action where somebody joined the group and decided that he would wander all over the bloody hall, right, shouting out answers, totally ignoring. We've worked with groups, both of us, where the teachers didn't understand their role. They were encouraged to join in, but they got taken in by the thing so much that they called out most of the answers. And if you hear them, you have to take them, right? But actually, they're not allowing anybody else to work with it. So there is locked up in instant theatre a new way of looking at the world, a new way of relating to people, so that people do not feel, as they're beginning to feel now, trapped within a form that they can't argue against, they can hardly breathe against.
And that speaks to etiquette. It speaks to what's the word? It's a fancy word for how things look. What's the word? But there's a whole different grammar about how things get conducted in that new space, that kind of that theatre in the round space, which many more formal theatres in the round don't necessarily produce.
Absolutely.
Partly because they've had to bring across the paraphernalia of the platform and put it in the round. In some cases, and I think the New Victoria near you in Newcastle-under-Lyme is a fantastic theatre, but it's of such a scale that it doesn't really allow for, you know, the sort of the perfect human scale, the intimacy that theatre in the round, or the instant theatre particularly, kind of prospered in.
But it's what happened in these new theatre in the rounds is the rise of design, and design actually pushes an audience away instead of drawing them in, right? And that's the control
that drawing in, it seems to me, and I want to try and bring this to a kind of a close, and as we're doing that, I want you to try and think about, you know, just giving us a very short sort of closing statement on not simply your own journey, but kind of what that adds up to, and why you think theatre still remains important, even though at this stage in our lives it tends to be the entertainment of the elite. But why theatre as an institution, theatre as a social thing, remains so important. But the term that you used there was the drawing in. The importance of working in the round is that you draw the audience into that centre, whether you're drawing them in physically or imaginatively. That's the pulling in of the audience into the centre is a critical dynamic for that particular form to work.
Yeah, I mean, what it means is the actors must always acknowledge the presence of that audience, not go round in the middle as though that audience is not there. I see that happen quite a lot in theatre. And you know, some people I've worked with in the amateur world, they just think their job is not to look at the audience. That is to be above them, even if you're working in the round. It's that communication of saying, I'm as ordinary as you are. I have a message to impart, right? From the individual, that's from the playwright. This is what he's saying. This is what we're getting across to you. Or we have a message to get from you, as in instant theatre. But you have to have that breakdown of that special space, right? The thing about the round is that it is the seed and the egg. You have the egg shape, right? And within that, once the sperm, once the actor gets inside, or that thing, it begins to germinate, and it begins then to occupy the space. And then eventually, when it's finished with, it gives birth, right? So in a sense, it's instant theatre is a metaphor from conception to birth, right? And what it gives birth to in instant theatre is a story, and that story is capable of being looked at again and again and again. If you accept the legitimacy of the metaphor, and most people don't, you see, they won't. If you try and explain it to people, they don't understand.
But and we've got a minute or two left just to finish off, Greg. I want to fix on this business of why the round is important, why theatre as a metaphor for society remains important.
Well, it's basically for me, it remains important because it is the return of the feminine principle, the return of sharing rather than striving. But it has to contain the striving within it. In the proscenium theatre, right, you get your circles, but they're all contained in the platform's desire to strive higher, and you get these various levels of theatre. You get amateur, professional, that stuff, right, and the great theatre and so on and all that. But the round makes each person in the round as an individual, is a platform of its own. The proscenium theatre, and remember, there's been nothing but mostly platform theatre since it started, because you could say that the coming of the masculine principle with the rape of the goddess mythologically by the sun, who then takes over, that actually gave birth to theatre. That gave birth to this idea of this platform that we kind of stood around. The round actually says, no, there's another way of doing this. That is, it's the feminine principle. It's the sharing. It's the you can make a list of as I often have, but I haven't got any here. The sense that we are of. In the round, we are symbolic of the fact that we are all of the same blood, right? We all come from the mother. On the platform, we are the breakaway group. We are the people who take over, the people with the striving ambition that wants to reach up and up and up and up, and eventually defeat the gods, metaphorically. Although you can see that happening, over the past 4 centuries, the throw out of the god, and I agree with that, because the thing about the gods is the gods turn from being mythological to being real, and that's not the role of the gods. But this idea of well, I don't know, that we need the individual. And the individual expressed through the word becomes the playwright or the poet, or through the other languages, the language of art, the language of music, the creative expression, right, comes within, the striving on. That's what, in a way, Mike Lee was showing last night. In the round, that is the world of the collective, where the collective says, no, we do have a say, but we have a say as individuals. We're not a consensus in the round. Each individual has a different idea and can put that idea in. And that idea might be totally different from any previous idea that's been given, but it is accepted and it belongs. So this coming together of the individual and the collective, the egalitarian nature of it, the sense of the sharing. We're sharing a building, a making of something, and I think that we had a go at it, and then suddenly things that, the proscenium, that platform's really very, very powerful. because it actually is occupied by very powerful people. But if we are going to survive as a race, we have to move to the concept of the round.
And on that thought, Greg, I think we shall leave it. My only sort of brief reflections are, to some extent, sorry, we had a couple of questions in. What are we talking about is one of them. Somebody called T has said, we're talking about theatre. We're talking about theatre shape and form, and the movement from traditional theatre forms such as proscenium arch and the platform to theatre in the round, and that's really what most of the conversation's been about for the last year, the last hour. Feels.
The message came up saying it had ended because of an error.
Well, yeah, but it hasn't ended. We just went offline there for a minute. So look, we're going to leave it there. My only sort of final thoughts are that, in a sense, the proscenium arch is set up to broadcast, not to receive, and theatre in the round is, in a sense, metaphorically at least, and this is where I think it has wider applications than just theatre. That theatre in the round is about both the sending of messages, the receiving of messages, and the processing of messages within a kind of a collective space. And to make that work requires etiquette. It requires form and understanding of form and understanding of the demands that form puts upon professionals, whether they're literally theatre professionals or people living in a world that's moving towards a much more kind of egalitarian. When I say moving towards it, I don't mean inevitably getting there, but that's certainly it appears to be the direction of travel where we're at the moment. Anyway,
many enemies to overcome. That's the trouble, and not much time to do it.
And on that happy thought, I'll leave you for this week. See you next week, 9:30 Wednesdays.
Right. Cheerio.
Cheerio.